Yeah, I was one of the original graphics accelerators. Oh, looks like we're getting ready to go live.
We're already live, Karl.
Oh, okay.
Tonight's meetup's being recorded. Is that okay with you guys?
Yes.
All right. So welcome everyone to New York Augmented Reality and our inaugural Great Display Debate. Amazing to see so many familiar faces here with us tonight. And new faces. Thanks to Jeri and Karl's posts on their respective blogs and social media accounts. So thank you guys very much for spreading the word about New York Augmented Reality. Our second meetup was actually with Karl and Avi Barziva, who's here tonight. Our first was on November 16th, 2020. And then tonight marks our 23rd event. And throughout the meetups, we've hosted over 70 incredible speakers. And we've grown to over 1,400 members tonight. So thank you everyone for your support. Although the industry is still filled with incredible hope and potential, we realize that behind these rose-colored holographic glasses are isolated developers and engineers looking for ways to connect with others. So to help better connect and foster the community, we set up a Slack channel so you can stay in touch with other members throughout after the event. We have a weekly newsletter called the Augmented Report where we share the latest news and industry happenings. And lastly, we recommend using the chat to comment on anything you find fascinating or reach out to somebody new. Our next formal evening meetup is on Monday, April 25th. It will be remote with Louis Rosenberg from Unanimous AI joining and Bradley Lynch, also known as Sadly It's Bradley, on YouTube. And also we have the winners of the MIT Reality Hack joining us as well. So that's Monday, April 25th in 2 weeks. You could RSVP for that on our meetup page. And we're hoping to start hosting in-person events in June. So if you know of a space that we can come and do consistent meetups once a month, that would be amazing, so reach out. Now, without further ado, I'm excited to move on to our main event, the Great Display Debate with Jeri Ellsworth and Karl Guttag. The entire event will be 1 hour long. The first half will be moderated by the one and only Barry Seff. And
hello.
Hey, Barry. And the second half will be open to audience participation and questions. If during the second half you'd like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand in the participants panel or ask your question through the chat and either me or Barry will ask it. At the end of the debate, we will have a poll where you can vote on who you feel had the best answers. The participant with the highest result will be declared the winner of tonight's Great Display Debate and receive a virtual NYAR trophy.
Oh man, I'm screwed. Karl was throwing down some shade earlier saying I only speak with facts. So
you're both going to do excellent.
Did you get an NFT for them? You know, come on, Andy. Get with the time.
We didn't do the NFT tie in this one, but maybe next debate.
Alrighty.
Okay. So.
Are you ready?
Are you ready?
On one side, we have Jeri. On the other, Karl, who are luminaries of the display world, in our opinion, and most of yours, I'm sure. Thank you so much again for coming, all of you, and Jeri and Karl. So basically, we'll let you guys have at it. Have fun and be nice, which I'm sure you will be. So we're going to start out with LCOS versus micro LED, but feel free to bring in any of your favorite acronym technologies along for the ride. And yep, thanks. Have fun.
So Karl.
Yeah.
This all started because I was a little tongue-in-cheek a few months ago in our last meetup here. So I thought I was being I more wanted to talk to you because I think it would be fun to debate these these topics from your perspective, looking at a lot of devices, and then my experience working at Valve Software in particular, where I got to work with quite a few devices. But when it comes to micro LED or LCOS versus, oh, I'm sorry, we're doing LCOS versus
micro LED first. I guess we can also do LCOS versus lasers. It's kind of like LCOS versus all challengers, since kind of today in AR, at least see-through AR. Well, you also got you've also got OLED, you've got micro OLEDs as well. So there's a lot of technologies out there, but they each have their own place. I tend to categorize things somewhat simply, like, does it fit here or does it fit there? But yeah, this started out, I think, with you talking about, I think, laser scanning. And
we'll have to save lasers, because I think that'll be the contentious one, right?
Well, I've looked at lasers. I mean, you can do laser illumination of LCOS, and that's interesting. That's an interesting way to go, versus laser scanning, which I've got a reputation for being kind of on the disfavorable side of. Let's put it that way. So do you want to take I guess we can do this as a case for and against or whatnot, but we could probably do some of this knockdown, like well, let's start with, why don't we do this? We can do like maybe do a knockout of talking about, let's talk like micro LED versus, let's start with micro LED versus LCOS, because they're the two that are kind of on the table. And then we can do talk about lasers and talk about the rest. So perfect.
Well, honestly, I think there's a lot of promise to micro LED. I haven't seen anything that's quite there yet.
Yeah, I'm looking at I think micro LEDs, I've been looking at them for about 5 years now. And I went through my wild enthusiasm stage a few years ago. If people don't know that, the wild enthusiasm stage is when something's new and shiny and all you hear is all the good stuff about it. And you haven't learned all the bad stuff yet. And micro LEDs are making progress, particularly Jaybird Display, some others. We know Meta bought Plessey. That was a big piece of news. And then Snap bought the guy they were working with, which was Compound Photonics, which was originally working with Plessey on micro LEDs. Now, I think you're going to take a lot longer to develop. I've been watching it for 5 years, and you kind of get I call a slope to how the progress is going.
Sorry to interrupt, but Compound Photonics is an LCOS maker, correct?
They also make micro LEDs. They're in both camps.
Okay, well, great.
And a lot of the rumor is the reason why Snap bought them was for their micro LED. Now, here's a big thing when we talk micro LEDs, or micro LEDs, is that there are really three different kind of technologies. We have the LEDs themselves. That's actually what Plessey made. Then we have the backplane that controls the stuff. And then perhaps the biggest thing is, how do you take the LEDs and put them on the backplane? And generally, when we're talking micro displays, tiny displays that are on silicon, the general belief is we're going to do what they call a flip chip, or some way of taking a wafer of LEDs, or a chip's worth of LEDs and a chip worth of control, and somehow flipping them and getting them together. As opposed to when we talk big displays, you could do what they call pick and place. You could grab each individual LED. Isn't one of your
biggest complaints about them, though, that they're non-uniformity between each of the LEDs?
Oh yeah, it's horrible, and it gets worse. If any of us who've ever worked with LEDs see that when you go to LEDs, they're always binned out. When you buy LEDs for a projector, you get bins. Well, as somebody once said, when you get a micro LED, you get all the bins on the same chip. So the problem is you have a high variability from pixel to pixel, and I'm still seeing that. It's tightened a little bit, but it's still pretty bad. The uniformity is not very good. You would not want to look at a photograph with it. If you're looking for informational display like text, that text or arrows and stuff where it's basically on off, they're getting there at low resolution. But it's still very low resolution, which means low field of view. And I'm worried about the efficiency. This is a big one that doesn't get talked about so much. They talk about 5 million nits, but maybe they get 5 million nits coming off the display, but what gets to your eye? And I think that's the part that bugs me, is that I've not had anybody tell me how many nits get to the eye for how many watts. This is my big bugaboo in specmanship, is that people will tell you how many nits they get. They'll tell you how many watts they take, but what they won't tell you is nits going into the display versus watts that make it to your eye. I'm sorry, watts into the display versus nits to the eye.
Karl, do you have any background on the commercial micro LEDs? There's Vuzix, I think, has an micro LED that you can buy, Oppo and Samsung, but that's the tiled wall display micro LED. I mean,
yeah, that's a whole different game. Vuzix is using Jaybird displays, micro LEDs. They're still just prototyping, as far as I know. I don't know there's any you can buy. Jaybird has the only micro LEDs you can buy. They're still monochrome green. Essentially, green is the only really useful color right now. You might consider using red, but right now they have a green micro LED. It's only, what is it, VGA-ish resolution, 640, 480 type. What I don't know, and what nobody's been willing to tell me, is how many watts to how many nits the eye. Like if you look at a Vuzix system, you also have to factor that for field of view too, because if you know, the bigger the field of view, it's going to take, if you have 10 times the field of view, well, it's going to be 10 times more power for the same brightness to the eye. But anyway, that's kind of the problem, is you can't get straight answers on watts in to nits to the eye.
So Karl, can we go back to the non-uniformity? Don't you think that they could do some of the tricks that they do on image sensors? If there's enough dynamic range to trim out these displays to fix the uniformity?
If you've ever seen them, I mean, I've looked at a lot of these kind of up close, taking some photographs and whatnot. You could be talking 5 or 10x non-uniformity pixel to pixel. So you can't level that out very well. If you try to level that out, you'd have to dim the display by 5x or 10x, and then you're in trouble that way. So the non-uniformity is a big problem, and it gets back to the physics of LEDs. They have what they call dislocations. And so when you go smaller and smaller, if you have a small little defect, that has a huge impact on a really tiny pixel. And that means that you get a lot of variability. Like I remember when I saw Plessis, I mean, the variability for pixel to pixel was maybe more than 10x. Now I think based just on visual observations, I think Jaybird is tightening that, but it's still not something you could do a photograph with. And this to me is where we get into a big difference too, is whether these things are going to be like replacements for cell phones or whether these things are informational displays. Because in informational display, you just need to read text or arrows or left or right or up or down, or X marks the spot. That's all you need for an informational display. Versus, are you going to put a photograph up there? And these things are not ready for primetime photograph. Unlike micro OLEDs, you know, they give you photographic quality images, but they can't get the brightness of a micro LED. I'm still not convinced that a micro LED through a waveguide for large field of view is gonna work out very well. I think the power of one of the things they never talk about, and that's my watts in to nits to the eye, they never talk about is the coupling efficiency. Just like OLEDs, micro LEDs have Lambertian or very diffuse light, and it's very hard to couple that into a waveguide. And most people, when they're thinking AR, they're thinking something that looks like glasses. And
Karl,
very thin optics.
Karl, I've been seeing some of the micro LED guys are putting micro lenses over the top of the LEDs, which certainly would be helpful to collimate the light per LED basis to help for coupling.
That's everybody did that, Phil. They're all doing. That's how they get to the nits that they're talking about. They've already got that. By the way, the OLED guys, Sony, for example, has been putting for several years micro lenses over the LEDs, over their OLEDs as well. The problem you have is you have some more, I'll call collimation gain. The only amount you can gain with that is based on the area ratio of the area of the emitter versus the area of the pixel. and maybe there's a 5x outside 10x lift. You can get some advantage from that, but you've got a huge, if you're going into a waveguide, these waveguides are so inefficient, particularly the diffractive ones, that
it's always the world combiner that gets us in AR displays, the efficiency and laws of physics, as you were pointing out before the show started. We don't get to break the laws of physics, and anyone that claims they are, they're in for a world of hurt, right?
Yeah. Well, I've been looking at the PC world. I started in the industry before there were PCs, anticipating them. I worked on some of the early video chips and stuff like that, and early accelerators. So I've kind of seen this from a long perspective, and unlike what I felt like in the late 70s, early 80s, I don't see things are quite as ready as people want them to be. They're over anticipating or over projecting how fast things can move.
Yeah, Jeri, can you tell? I know you've been wanting to talk about laser-based
Yeah,
scanning.
maybe we should get into that. That's when you've been wanting to.
Yeah, a lot about the ramping up of micro LEDs, but and that's
no, that's good. It moves along.
But how's laser? What do you see with the laser? What do you see the pros, the cons of laser, and how?
Yeah. There's some key benefits to lasers that I got to see firsthand in some R&D we did at Valve. As far as AR displays that are really, really interesting, and I know there are downsides, and Karl's going to, take me down a notch on that. But one of the key advantages that we saw with laser is the zero persistence effect. So if you're doing a display, since it's a spot that's cruising across your eye and drawing each pixel, you can render just in front of that pixel, and you can have basically a zero persistent display, which that yielded the best AR or the best display I've ever seen as far as rendering an image on my eye. At Valve, we had this huge optical system. It's huge. We called it the telescope. And so you look down this thing that had a bunch of relay lenses. It had a series of micro lenses to do pupil expansion. Then it had a laser scanner at the far end of the thing. But to have those key benefits of almost zero persistence on the display gave a sense of realism when we looked through it that I haven't seen yet. I know Karl doesn't like the wibbly wobbly effects of the vibrating mirrors. And
well, I think it's a multifaceted thing. The problem is fundamental problem is they can't move the mirror fast enough, and that gets into the physics. You're trying to move a mechanical mirror and scan this beam around. And HoloLens, I've done, if you go to my blog, I've done all kinds of pictures showing how bad the image is. HoloLens went backwards in terms of image quality from going from LCOS to laser scanning. And they spent tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to put up a really crappy image. The HoloLens has other factors like ergonomic factors and the slam and all that kind of pull it through. I sometimes say that HoloLens is proof that image quality is not important in AR.
Why is ST Microelectronics investing in it if it's crap? Like, why would ST Microelectronics be investing in laser beam scanning if it's just
because they're in America. They're basically in micro machines, so they're providing the technology that makes the mirrors.
Well, they wouldn't be investing millions of dollars if they didn't think it's feasible, or you think it's just a dead end.
I don't think they know, and I have nothing against them. This is not a personal thing, particularly. Yeah. There's some arguments. There's some personality issues with Microvision, but with anybody else in the laser industry, I have no beef, no personal beef. I have a physics beef with them. I have a beef that basically you can't move the mirror fast enough. And by the way, some people say, well, we'll put two lasers in there.
That's what I was going to bring up.
There's a company called Microsoft who tried that. A product called HoloLens. They have two lasers per. They have two greens, two reds, two blues, and they tried to, and they've got a line amazingly well. And once again, I've gone through this on my blog. I went into great detail with photographs. The problem you have is even if you can get them aligned, because of the scanning process, they can't stay aligned. So the scanning process causes them to, and particularly the way they did with an interlace. So they ended up going to like 30 hertz. They went 120 hertz four-way interlace. So their actual refresh rate is only 30 hertz, which is a flicker, which is going to cause flicker, and it does cause flicker. The problem you have with lasers is that reality keeps coming back to you. It sounds so simple. I get this all the time from people who know nothing about it, but they think it sounds so simple to move a laser back and forth. And it sounds so simple, and it does have no persistence, which can be a benefit. Also has a downside that you've got to get the refresh rate at least double the rate of most other displays, because if you don't, you're going to get flicker because there's no persistence built into the technology. But my main beef is whenever I've looked at it, I've been looking at laser scanning for over 20 years, and it never supports good. The resolution is always poor. The flicker is bad. There may be some eye safety issues, but that's less of a day in, day out thing if they can control it. At least the people doing it claim it's not an eye safety.
Eye safety was a huge concern for us. If that laser stops, you're in trouble.
You've got to have a way of killing it and not having it be too bright. And this may get to be more of an issue if you try to go to high brightness. But I mean, I've looked at, and like I say, my blog is full of stuff comparing LCOS versus laser scanning. And I've yet to see a laser scanning display and by the way, they always lie about the resolution because they talk about scan lines, and scan lines aren't pixels. If you think about it, the scan line almost always hits between at least 2 to 4 pixels. So what happens is by the time you try to equate the resolution or put something up there, thanks to Nyquist sampling, it's always like a half or a quarter. I've never seen a display, for example, HoloLens. I've put stuff up through HoloLens, put an image up through it, and it's a quarter to a tenth what they claim it is in resolution.
One of the challenges you have with lasers is to be able to switch them fast enough. You know, back in the day, direct green lasers were not available, and some of the early microvision stuff, they had to do some crazy pumped, green lasers, have them in an oven so that the crystal is at the right temperature. And that was always challenging. If you put too much green up, the crystal would fall out of its sweet spot and you'd lose all the green in your display.
That's another thing people don't think about, but that laser is actually having to go from 0 to full speed to 0 at each line. So it's scanning and it's got to accelerate to its maximum speed and back to 0. So it's moving very, very slowly at the sides and moving at maximum speed in the center usually. Because of that all your color depth and all that control of color depth, a lot of that goes into trying to compensate, because as the beam's moving slower, you have to drive the laser very much less hard. At the very center of the screen, you have to drive the laser very, very hard at its hardest, because its dwell time, its time on this per pixel is very small. So now what happens is you end up using up a huge percentage of your color depth just switching the laser on and off. So you you just get a very poor image quality out. And this has been true of when they've done projectors with it. People think about laser projectors, but the laser projectors in theater, Dolby laser projection, but that's laser illumination of a DLP. And that's a whole different game. And even then, they have to vibrate the screen to get rid of the speckle. That's one of the big
secrets. That brings up a good point, Karl.
They actually, that giant screen out there has vibrators on it, because that's their final way of getting rid of speckle. One of the problems you have with lasers, you do not have if you directly go into the eye. I don't know all the ins and outs they're doing these days, but speckle is darn hard to get rid of. And that's been a big drawback to using it with LCOS and DLP.
Well, my experience with direct laser scanning, we didn't see speckle. There was no interfering wave fronts.
You don't have it with direct to the eye.
Yeah.
The problem you have with direct to the eye is that you have no eye box.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Basically, either the laser hits the eye or it doesn't hit the eye. This was North had this problem. We can talk lots and lots of laser scanning failure. I mean, the list is endless of failures, and the list of successes is like non-existent.
Jeri, sorry to interrupt, Karl. I know Jeri.
Please keep moving us on.
Yeah, that's cool. I know you wanted to talk about VixCell, which was related to lasers. So you maybe want to explain that and to see how that may be to help laser
Well,
scanning.
there's an area of new lasers, which I think is promising. So on a monolithic substrate, you can do vertical cavity lasers. It's still super early. They're primarily used for like infrared illumination for, depth sensors and stuff like that. However, there is research into various wavelengths. I find those quite interesting because, because it is a laser, your efficiency is going to be quite a bit higher. You don't have to worry about, light spraying out of these lasers, in this sphere and trying to collect it and tend to, issues of your optical system. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Karl.
Well, I mean, VCSELs are nothing new. I mean, they've been around for at least 20 something years. I remember there was a whole bunch of stuff. I worked with some VCSEL guys, golly, back in the late, like 2009, 2010, thereabouts. And yeah, I mean, they're there. I mean, you're talking about having color shifting ones and all. They still don't move the needle on terms of you still got to be able to drive them really fast. And oftentimes VCSELs aren't quite as fast switching as, say, native lasers. But bigger issue is you can't move the mirrors fast enough. You can't move the mirrors fast enough, you're in trouble. VCSELs, at least the ones I dealt with, still had a fairly narrow wavelength. Direct lasers, turns out this is one of the tricks that HoloLens 2 uses, is they bang that laser really, really fast, and that tends to make native lasers hop frequency a bit, and that breaks up speckle. VCSELs with their cavities, historically have had a fairly narrow bandwidth, which means speckle's bad. So if you're going to use them for illumination, then I wouldn't be surprised if that's not what Dolby's using as VCSEL lasers, by the way, at least for some of it. But anyway, I don't know that it really changes the picture. They've been around for a long time. Even if they were to change colors, like have color changing, now how are you going to change colors fast enough from pixel to pixel to pixel?
Well, no. I mean, what about an array of RGB VCSELs all on the same substrate?
Yeah. So are you talking about having a direct display, a display like where the pixels are?
Yeah, display. Yeah, there's been some research in this area.
Well,
no,
good. I mean, I think it's farther out than I think that's going to be a lot further out than micro LEDs.
I'd have to agree with you on that.
Yeah, but no, in theory, in absolute theory, that would be an interesting technology. You still got to figure out how to couple it to the eye. Let's say I had a VCSEL array.
Mm-hmm. I just want to
wiggle it a little bit. Maybe there's another way to go. You say, hey, if I get a sub array, and I'll wiggle this way around and try to get other stuff out of it too. There's a lot of things you can speculate on, but I think that's a long ways away.
Jeri and Karl, we're just gonna, if you could wrap it up in the last 5 minutes. And
we're already used up all our time.
Yeah,
that was it. 2 questions, and we.
So just one question from me. Which technology do you guys think will be ramped up to mass production in any application? It could be automotive, it could be mass consumer, within the medical, of an AR application within the next, say, 5 to 10 years? Which you think will be the dominant display technology?
It depends on if you're talking brightness. If you're talking brightness, I used for a while there. If you asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said micro LEDs. If you ask me today, I'm back onto LCOS. I have a background in LCOS. People think I'm biased towards it, but I'd be happy to go through all the physics of it. People keep looking at all this other stuff, and it's kind of like grass is greener. They go over there, and the next thing they do, they come back. I think still for the next 5 years, we're in an LCOS. You can do things with LCOS now. An interesting thing coming up these days, is we've seen a move back for small versus big. Some of the LCOS guys, particularly I saw this with Abagon and Digilens. They both said, oh, if you're willing to accept a little VGA or small low resolution display and you want it small, we can do that with LCOS too. So you're saying to the micro LED guys, if you really look at kind of what's going on now with like the micro LEDs, some of these LCOS guys are saying, well, if all you want is like green only, or if all you want is VGA and all you want is 30-degree field of view or less, we can do this. And by the way, that's one of the interesting topics. We're kind of seeing this bifurcation now going on where you have some guys are going with small field of view and saying, man, we could do something right now. It won't do all the slam. It won't do all the everything, but we can build something that looks like glasses. Actually, you're seeing this out of some of these companies. Whereas if you want 50 degree and 80 degree and all this other stuff, well, you're into a helmet. I don't think that'd be an interesting question too, but I don't see people other than, Jeri's thing with Till 5 is a whole different game. She totally,
naturally.
It's a very, very different architecture, extremely different. But
so
traditional multi-use glasses, then yeah.
I actually think it's split. I think LCOS is going to drive a bunch of application-specific headsets, just as Karl said, but I think OLED is going to drive a lot of application-specific headsets. I don't think there's one headset that's going to win them all. There's going to be different applications and problems being solved by each. And I still see, like, in areas where you need high resolution, high fidelity, OLED's wonderful, right? And
the
other areas we need high brightness.
Brightness and transparency with the optics you can use. Now, there's a company called RIM out of Israel. They're kind of interesting in that they've got a little bit to cut through this. You're also seeing it with twos a little bit. But when you talk OLEDs, you can't be talking waveguides. You've got to be talking some other type of optics.
Birdbath.
And most of those optics are like Birdbath, Nreal, and there's like 24 Birdbaths out there now. I can't keep track of all of them. They all look alike, and they all have the same problem. As soon as you say Birdbath, you're going to end up in about a 30% transparency. You're going to block 70% of the light before you start. You're going to get really good image quality because if you use an OLED. The OLEDs give you great image quality, but they can't get around the transparency issue. Also, the OLEDs are now getting you 1K, 3,000 nits, but that's not what gets to your eye. Only about 10 to 15% of the light from the display makes it to your eye. So if you start with 1,000 nits, well, you get 150 nits to the eye. That's okay for indoor use. I also make a big dividing line. I always say that when you're talking hundreds of nits, you're talking indoors. If you want to use it anywhere, like outdoors, you have to have thousands of nits from to the eye. And that's even if you start using darking sunglasses and all, you need some latitude. And so unless you have thousands of nits, you're not going outdoors with it. You're kind of forced in indoors. So what happens with OLEDs is you start adding this up. You say, well, you can't use waveguide optics, so it's going to end up tending to be thick. So you either have to go very small, or if you want a big field of view, like a bigger field of view in the 40-50 range, you now get something that's like an inch thick. Now, I don't know if ORIM can break through that. I know ORIM's got kind of a different cut on this, which is kind of interesting. They're in between on thickness, and they're doing some other neat things.
I think you bring up some interesting points, Karl, about OLED versus LCOS. An advantage of LCOS is you can have really small, high-resolution displays, which is super interesting, but it makes your optics very complicated, right? You have to do pupil expansion, things like this, so that you have an eye box, eye relief big enough that the device is useful, and you can have lower cost devices because you have less silicon involved. But if you want to simplify your optics, then you move towards OLED, where you can have much bigger display surface area and maintain your eye box and eye relief through simpler optics.
You end up, like I say, you usually end up in a pretty thick historically, you end up for the size of the field of view, you end up in fairly thick optics. Like I say, if you want to break that, I call it it's kind of like 25 to 30 degrees is the breaking point. I've seen this also from, okay, I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, you see that this 25 to 30 degrees is kind of the breaking point. As soon as you go beyond that point, you're into either thick optics. Basically, you start wanting to do pupil expansion past 30 degrees. Mm-hmm. And once you go to pupil expansion, you get to very, very low efficiency. One of the things that LCOS gives you is because the size, and it's a nasty term, étendu, but because the size of the light source can be small as an LED versus an OLED that has a big light source, is they can get small, the étendu is very small, which means they can get really collimated light into a waveguide. This is something that I'm not convinced is true yet with micro LEDs. They start with Lambertian light. Yes, you can put some micro lenses on them. That helps, but it does not solve the problem. It's still highly Lambertian. Matter of fact, micro LEDs start out as almost anti-Lambertian. They're almost worse than Lambertian because they actually have a dead spot in the center. So you're fighting to get that light brought in, and I'm curious to see the finish. I know I picked up a set of VUSA glasses at the SPIE AR VR MR. Those temples were pretty warm. They're trying to move that heat. That's another big thing people don't think about. I always say that most people, amateurs worry about battery life, pros worry about getting rid of the heat.
Yeah.
Hey guys, we're going to start moving on now to the audience questions. We'll take each question and we'll focus on it for a maximum of 5 minutes each. And we'd like if possible, and we'd like to present it to each of you individually, where you could have up to 2 minutes to state your answer. This way we can keep track of the debate. So Barry, we'll get started with the first question.
Yep, I'll go with a question about switchable Bragg gratings, which is, as far as I know, DigiLens's technology. They used to be called SBG for switchable Bragg gratings. Could switchable Bragg gratings be fast enough to modulate a laser beam? So I guess that interplays two of the technologies that were discussed. So Jeri, you want to take that first, or do you?
Gosh, I don't know much about Bragg grating, switchable Bragg gratings. I always thought they'd be interesting for correcting for diffractive artifacts in a headset. So how red light versus green and blue light traverse the optics. Maybe you could have an interesting, Bragg grating in there. You could switch to, perhaps use one waveguide to display all of red, green, or blue, or use a holographic combiner and do some corrections for, the red, green, and blue shift. But definitely not my area of expertise.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to be nearly fast enough. They're talking wobulation. That's going to be in the 30 to 60 or maybe 120 cycles per second range. It's basically an LCOS. It's a liquid crystal type technology. So you're talking hundreds of hertz type of switching.
Yeah, I imagine
not nanosecond switching.
Yeah, the capacitance on such a, from what I've seen, they're fairly large. So there's a lot of capacitance between the electrodes, and probably switch kind of slow.
Yeah, I don't think that's a way to go. So I think we move on. Yeah.
Well, there was a question.
We both agree, right? It's probably not.
All right. Well, so it was someone. I mean, I know, Karl. You're really high on LCOS, so I'll address this one to Jeri, but you can send your comments again. Is LCOS scaling played out? That is, LCOS pixels cannot be made smaller or packed tighter.
Could you repeat that, Barry? You broke up. Sorry.
Broke up. Okay. So this is about LCOS, and let me pull it up. Apologize. A lot of questions. Thanks you for all the questions. And yes, and Karl, everyone is loving on your blog. So definitely Karl's blog for a primer on display technology. Is LCOS scaling played out? That is, LCOS pixels cannot be made smaller or packed tighter?
I think it's talking about the diffraction limit of the pixel size. There is a limit, right? You just can't go below the wavelength of light on the pixel size and be useful. However, I'm sorry, I'm taking your question, Karl, but
no, that's your. I think they wanted you to answer this one.
I think the challenge with LCOS is it's like any semiconductor. So surface area squared and defects reduce your yields and drive the cost up of the device. So you're incentivized if you're an LCOS manufacturer to go smaller so that you have higher yields but there is definitely a limit optically as far as you can go on pixel size.
Yeah, there's the big problem. I mean, LCOS right now has a huge advantage in this regard because LCOS is mostly, the high resolution LCOS is field sequential color. That causes issues, and that's a different subject. But in terms of pixel size, it dominates today. It is getting limited though, because they had an advantage over DLP because the gaps around the mirrors are smaller than with DLP. That led them get to smaller pixels without diffraction just eating them alive. But remember, the wavelength of green light is like about 530 nanometers, and red light's 640. We can't go smaller than the wavelength of light. You're talking pixels now that are getting really small. Now, emission has a little advantage if you could emit all the colors. Right now, when you do a micro LED, say, they're doing spatial color, red, green, blue. If you do that, well, now you're at a big disadvantage because now you got to be 3 times as big. But LCOS, it's tough. The thing I used to hear is, at some point you've got to put a microscope too, because the other issue you have is how do you start with such a tiny pixel? Because LCOS, I think, have been getting down, they go down to 3, and they could go smaller pixels, but then you get into a problem of optics, that now your optics have got to blow this thing up with basically you have a microscope trying to look in at your pixels. But it's kind of played out, I think. It's going to be really hard to get much below 3. Yeah, you'll see people, you could do as a Bravo. Right now, you can make a pixel that's probably, a micron, just over the wavelength of red light. It would do something, and people could do it. But that's really where your limit is, back to physics. And I think diffraction will probably eat you alive much below, it starts eating you alive below 3. But you could probably practically do something maybe down in the 1 range, 1.5. But then diffraction just eats you alive.
A lot of the LCOS salespeople have been pushing higher reflectivity on each pixel, which is interesting. So they can go smaller pixels with better reflectivity, which is nice to see that they're putting effort into increasing the efficiency as the pixel area size goes down.
Yeah, they're pretty good already, though. An LCOS mirror, even in my day, I haven't worked for an LCOS company for over 10 years. I'm just looking at all the physics, and it keeps coming. Everyone talks about all this other stuff, and they turn around, and next thing you know, they're back using LCOS because they've tried all this other stuff. It's all comes back down to physics of the problem, and that's going to be a problem for these micro LED guys. How are they going to do color? Are they going to go 3-chip? Combining 3 chips is a lot harder than people think. I worked in the early days. I worked in 3-chip LCOS, and people don't think about it, but you got to align those things with 6 degrees of freedom. They have to be every angle. They have to be aligned relative to the optics, and the 3 chips have to be perfectly aligned relative to each other, or they run out in focus. And no amount of software can fix focus problems.
Awesome. Okay, well, here's a great question about physics, but I'll give to Jeri because to give some more airtime. Apple will not break physics in order to launch their product. Okay, that's just kind of a comment, really. Okay, but there's a question again about lasers, so maybe you want to talk. It's about what about a laser through a waveguide or other combiner? Is speckles still present there?
Yes, I've definitely seen speckle through waveguides. You have interfering wavefronts, that get combined in things like waveguides. And as you do things like pupil expansion, I know people were asking, what is pupil expansion? Maybe I should explain that super briefly. So the smaller your display source, a laser is a point source, so it's extremely small. You need to replicate the pupil, the output, so that you can actually look at the display. So they have these diffraction gratings and waveguides that replicate the image time and time again at different angles. So it comes out of the waveguide so that as you swing your eye around, you can actually see an image. But in doing that, you start to get different copies of the same laser light that's all coherent. And as it shows up at your eye, it starts interfering, and then you get that subtle, speckle problem showing up, which is tricky. tricky to deal with because you're working with real world physical objects that, you know, aren't perfect in every way, and wavefronts don't have to be that far off to see speckle.
Thank you.
Karl, go ahead, Karl.
What? Yeah.
You can prove me wrong.
No, I mean, you know, I don't know all the issues, but I know that HoloLens had some of their problems with image uniformity and all, I'm told, was something to do with the lasers and the narrow. People, when you first think about it, people say, well, it'd be so much easier for diffractive waveguides if we have narrow band light sources like lasers, which have two things. They're very highly collimated, but they're also very narrow band. They have very tight frequency spectrum. Everyone is lights. Jeri has automation that turns their lights off. But I hear that was part of their problem that led to a degree. They one of those things they tripped over on Grass is Greener is there a lot of criticalness in trying to make a laser scanned image work with these waveguides. I think it made some tolerances extremely critical, which is one of the problems they had in bringing them out. Like I say, lasers are perfectly fine until you look at the real world. You know, until you throw a little physics in there and start to actually implement it. They look great on paper. Lasers have historically been one of those things that looks great on paper and doesn't work well in the real world. LCOS, on the other hand, is one of those things that's kind of like, ooh, I don't know. But in the real world, it's like it keeps coming back. They keep coming back to it. It's a little like LCD televisions. You know, how long have we, you know, first we had CRTs, they last a long time. Then they went away with LCDs. We still haven't seen really LCD televisions get supplanted yet. And that's basically a liquid crystal technology. But they're still dominating in the television world today. You see some OLEDs creeping in, but then you've got other people doing other stuff.
Basically comes down to price, I think. But, you know, that's a big, I think, you know, issue here about scaling up. Okay, but there was Uncle Smokey. He mentioned NanoWeb twice, and I think that might be Metamaterials, who took some of North's, I believe some of North's employees, at least one that I talked to. So I'm not sure if they're using some of North's IP with them, but I'm not sure. But are you familiar? Either you familiar with NanoWeb by Meta? It's a transparent conductive film. Or I think that's
familiar with it.
Yeah, Metamaterials in Canada.
Yeah, we're familiar with them a little bit. I know that they
also the head,
Jonathan Walder and the Digilent founders gone there to work on some level, some kind of waveguide stuff, diffractive type thing. But they do a lot of different technologies, but I'm not overly familiar with their stuff.
Okay. Neither am I. You know, I think metamaterials are pretty interesting, you know, but it's very much a research area right now. You know, how do you get bandwidth up on these, you know, metamaterials so that you can have an illumination source that's efficient with them? You know, it's university papers I looked at recently. They're adding all kinds of serifs and little things to the nano features to expand the bandwidth so that, you know, you get more than a fraction of a percent of light, you know, absorbed and re-emitted by them. And
yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they solve it all. There's a lot you can do on the illumination side that doesn't work on the image side. You know, we tend to think in terms, a lot of people just do this stuff. You tend to think in things that are in the image, like looking at the display itself that involves pixels. And the other side is illumination side. And you don't need the level of quality at the microscopic level that you do there. But a lot of these things, I wonder whether they'll actually work well on the imaging side. Will you see bad effects? Will you see fringing? It's kind of like to a degree, an extreme of this is in virtual reality headsets. You've got the Fresnel lenses. Well, that's kind of a similar principle. What happens is you get these diffraction-y problems from the Fresnels, and that's where you get your God rays and all that other stuff. And I'm wondering if we put some of these metamaterials into the imaging side, will we see some of those same problems?
All right, one final question, of course, about LCOS. So maybe LCOS is winning. Maybe
maybe it shouldn't have been Jeri versus Karl. Maybe it should have been Elkos against the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we like to have people win, I guess.
And I would like to. I was really hard over for micro LEDs like 3 years ago. I thought, man, they're just going to win because I know all the problems they'll cause. But what happened in the 3 years after that is I learned a lot about the problems of micro LEDs.
Yep. Okay. Well, so here's the question about LCOS. If LCOS pixel density is close to the limits, does it mean that, for example, to increase resolution for T5 to 1080p, 2160p, and beyond, you'll have to use larger LCOS projector, I guess, components?
Yeah, you're kind of getting there. And I am hard over when you're talking about see-through AR. I think we're a lot further than people think. I think there's a reason why Apple keeps delaying. I think they keep finding that it's not really Apple enough. It turned out to quirks of design and all, it's really easy to make very wide field of view VR. And it's really, 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 really hard to do wide field of view AR, see-through stuff. And by the way, before somebody jumps in with like Lynx and other companies that are going to do pass-through AR, which is where you put a camera in front, has a whole different set of problems. I'm fond of saying that pass-through AR has almost an equal but opposite set of problems of see-through AR. It's just different problems.
I'm with you on that.
Massive problems with doing pass-through AR as well. AR is augmented reality is a lot harder than all the people in the press and the people making out. As I sometimes say, Meta demonstrated how good an AR display they could put in Bose glasses, and something in a glasses form factor. Yeah, big goose egg. And they spend tens of billions of dollars to get to that point. It is a hard problem. The physics is my big thing. It keeps coming back to is that they don't get different physics.
Jeri, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the difficulties of pass-through AR.
Yeah, I mean, when I worked at Valve, we tried to do pass-through. We thought maybe it would be the nirvana for us. We tried everything. There's just some really big challenges when your cameras have a different depth of field than your eyes, a fixed depth of field. You have them mounted not where your eyeball is, they're mounted somewhere out away from your head. What we found is it just constantly felt like an out-of-body experience, which was uncomfortable. And so, although technically it works, there's some human factors that, I don't think are solvable. Can people adapt to it? Maybe, I don't know, but
yeah, it's kind of dangerous in that, as she said, what you really need to do is your cameras don't just not have to be located on the eye, but they have to move with the eye, almost on a pivot, to get them, keep them perfectly aligned with where the eye is looking. How are you going to do that in real time is a fun problem. Also, focus is wrong. How are you going to fix the focus? When you look like in an AR display, the real world's in focus is the same way it does with anything else. When you do pass-through, all of a sudden the focus is flat. So now you start having to build a light field display or something where you have
some nitro cameras sticking out of the front of your VR system, and
you have like dozens of cameras, and this is the problem. You very quickly spiral away. That's why I said that there's an equal, maybe even a bigger number of problems with pass-through AR. It's just it's grass is greener stuff. It's just you haven't thought about all the other stuff. I sometimes say that the process is first you have to be in the wild enthusiasm stage where you just accept it, believe it for a little bit, try to get in there and accept it. But then you have to then put on the engineer glasses or the engineer thought and say, how is this all going to be made to happen? And you start to do the math and start to look at the physics and stuff. And a lot of these things just don't pass that test the more you know about them, all you're uncovering. The marketing guys always tell you the good stuff. Oh, this is how it's going to be wonderful. But they don't tell you how it's not.
What do you guys think of Mojo Vision and the contact lenses?
We may have to dedicate another hour.
Yeah, I'm highly, let's put it this way, I'm highly skeptical. We're back to physics again.
Yeah.
One of the big things they have to do is they have to put that display right in front of your eye. And I believe, at least at their latest prototype, I think they're about 1 millimeter. Well, that's 1 millimeter diameter sitting in front of your pupil. Your pupil's only like at bright light, it's at 2 millimeters, and dim light, it's 8 millimeters. But it's also the light's going to diffract around it.
Yeah, knife edge diffraction.
So, and you have optics in there too. You have to have mechanical support in there with diffraction, light bending around all that. I think what it does is it sacrifices your good image. What you're doing is you're robbing the really good rays that focus easily when you want to. When you look at a book or something, or if you're wanting to look at something on the wall, you're going to see it wobbly and stuff because you've got something in front of your eye.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I suspect that, since it's blocking the sweet spot of your pupil, distance vision probably won't be impacted too much except for loss of light, but anything getting up close where, your eye needs to focus on something up close, it's going to become a pretty bad mess of diffraction around the edge of the display. Plus, you're losing the best part.
Whatever structure, you got to have some optics there because they've got to focus. Yeah. That image is so close to the eye that you've now got to have some serious optics in there to focus it. The optics have to be bigger than the display itself, and you got to have whatever going through to get to it. The other problem, they're only talking a 256 by 256 display. They're like 1 point something millimeters. I'm sorry, 1 point something microns. So they're already getting pretty close to the wavelength of light, and that's for a green only one. So you're really into a tiny box of very low res. So you're talking 256 by 256. You're talking like ancient television resolution, and that gets you green, and that's in one color only. And you're already causing problems with vision. So I think they're in an unsolvable box. I think the problem is the time you put something big enough to put any kind of image up there, if you're trying to do like, you're trying to cheat for doing a presentation, instead of a teleprompter, maybe for a teleprompter, maybe. But if you're getting much past that, you're not going to get much content up there. And if you try to get much content up there, you're going to really screw up the person's ability to see.
Actually, I think there's a really killer app for their technology if they can get it across the finish line, probably with people that have visual impairments. There could be some interesting stuff that you do with that.
I know people, I have a good friend who's working in that area, and I know several other companies in that area, and I think it's,
but yeah, the question is, why don't you just do that with a different headset, not a contact lens, Yeah,
you've got to do a lot of other stuff to that image. Most of those people have the big one is macular degeneration, and they need to have the image made bigger, not smaller. They need a big image because the macula, the fovea, the whole center portion of their vision is gone. And what they need is a big display. They're almost candidates for, they need big field of view. They don't need resolution, but they need a big image. So they can use the outer parts of their eye that are not very good. I don't see how having a really tiny image, it seems to me like they're grasping at straws. That's the way it felt like to me.
Yeah, I mean, just do away with the light coming around the edge of their micro display and just make it entirely a micro display if they, insist on having a display on that contact lens and do some other interesting stuff with it. But I mean, there's a lot of other questions I have, like biocompatibility. Like they have a lot of, materials in that contact lens. There's going to have to be a lot of.
Yeah, it's a serious FDA thing. You have to have minor FDA, even for glasses. Like I had the friend who works in vision impairment. They have just glasses that fit on. It's the lowest level of FDA, but they have to get FDA approval. Yeah. You do something that's going to touch the eye, your FDA approval is going through the roof. Plus, people don't realize it's not a normal contact. That contact is actually landing on the white of the eye. It covers it. It's a pretty large contact lens that has to happen for that to work.
And then you have to wear glasses anyway. You have to transfer power in. I suppose they're using infrared or something strobed at those photocells.
Well, let's see. They were going to do magnetic, but then you think that all the problems you heard about a few years ago with Motorola or a headset. Remember we talked about cell phones are going to cause you stuff? Imagine you've got this big thing with a coil radiating energy. Yeah. I think they went away from that. And I think their latest thing is batteries. They're going to get like 2 hours of battery life. So you're going to have to charge them. I think they found that they were going to run into too many FDA problems with running putting your charging coil around your head. So they went to batteries as their latest.
Oh, interesting. Some lithium batteries in your eyes.
I think they're jumping from the frying pan to the fire on it. I haven't seen it, and I know they're. I think the more interesting thing may be their micro LED technology itself, that they're down at 1 nanometer and stuff, or sorry, one micron. That they've got maybe some interesting LED technology, but I think that every which way they come around it, they'll come back to problems. Not to mention which, how do you try this thing out? You got to basically have a prescription contact made to even try it out, and there's just a lot of things that are. It's a very hard technology to break. It's just like, But as I said, if you give me an AR technology, I'll tell you what's wrong with it. They've all got fatal flaws. Some are just more fatal than others.
What do you think of the Lumos Maximus display engine?
Yeah, well, that's of all the AR, that's my favorite. It's got a great image quality. It's bright. They're talking 3,000 to 4,000 nits. Image quality is quite good. I think fragility is a big issue for it, but they've gone finally with a 2D expander. Of course, ironically,
they always had a 2D expander on their waveguides. They always had a 2D expander on the Lumos, and they had always ran down the side to do the vertical, and horizontal is the embedded.
Yeah, they had to have a very large optics. What they did is in the older Lumos, the original Lumos, it was 1D expansion. You had to optically expand in one direction and shoot it in. Therefore, they needed a very large projector optics, very oblong projector optics, like on the edge or coming down from the top. The new 2D reflective expansion, in addition to the pupil expansion, but they're doing now 2D pupil expansion. Because of that, they can get away with a much smaller projector. The projector optics, that's the reason to go 2D in expansion, is to get you down. So their projector optics are much, much smaller now, more in line with what you see with the diffractive optics.
Quite interesting question from Eric. That's actually about audio and spatial audio. Are there any issues with audio AR, or is that even considered AR? Is that something that either of you focus on?
I don't.
Okay.
Well, I think audio is a vital part of any kind of experience. It's usually overlooked, which is funny. Even in video games, it's sometimes one of the last things to go in, and it has some of the biggest impact on the user experience.
Yeah, and there's a lot of problems there because you don't have a lot of space to make in your, you don't have a lot of room. You either go with earbuds or you go with something, bone conduction, a lot of those things. But it's hard to put really good audio in. You've got space problems. I mean, that's, our big problem is fundamental is that you don't have a lot of room. You can't have a lot of weight. And in case of AR, you can't put the display where you want it. You'd want to put the display in front of the eye, but you end up putting it back around the temples or something, and then having to figure out some really bad way to route the light to the eye. AR's got a lot of things that make it difficult. And that's the part I spent a lot of my day trying to explain to people is why it's so hard and why it's going to stay hard for a while because there's stuff. Now, I will say, I am seeing, as I said, I've seen some interesting stuff for the people who are not trying to be the be all end all AR. There are applications that are starting to maybe break through. If you're trying to do informational displays and you just want to do it in glasses and be small and light, if you're willing to accept, 20, 30 degree field of view, that there are guys making some interesting stuff now that's fairly light, fairly small. We're seeing both the LCOS guys doing it, and we're seeing it with the Jaybird display stuff. But you are talking resolutions that are going to probably be usefully more like VGA, 640, 480 in that ballpark, maybe 1280 by 768 at the outside. but because there's no need to go much more than that at 30 degrees. And by the way, you can go resolution all you want. If it's see-through, you're not going to see the pixels anyway. I think it's a waste of money to go beyond about 40 pixels per degree. If you go like 60, you can go 60 pixels per degree, but if you're wearing see-through types display, you're not going to make any difference. On the other hand, you don't want to go to like 30 pixels per degree, because now everything starts getting kind of chunky. It's hard to read text there's some real text problems once you get beyond about 40 pixels per degree. I always think 40 pixels per degree is the sweet spot in AR. But anyway.
So we're over, but people still want to ask some more questions. Is that okay with you guys?
Fine with me. I wait.
Okay. Question on Magic Leap 2 transmissive displays. The transmissive display. Jeri, would love to hear your thoughts on the dynamic dimming.
I've done some experiments in this area, and actually, having an occluder is what we always called it, and a liquid crystal in the front to darken particular regions, I thought actually looked pretty good. You could have a region of the display darkened, and you could have some AR, content there. It's because it's not focused, it's not really affecting the light field coming through. It's highly vignetted, and there's the downside of that. So it gives everything a really soft edge to it.
Sure.
A downside that we never figured out was like, how do you get rid of the diffractive elements of having a liquid crystal out there with, rows and columns in front of your eyes. So it kind of mangled the transmissive world view that you were looking at, which is a challenge. I don't know if they've done anything to correct that. Karl probably.
They apparently are doing a little bit of wobbling, and they've gone diagonal. That they're trying to move the diffraction effects around. By the way, once again, plug for the blog, but I've written an article talking about it. I've written several articles on Magic Leap 2 talking about this dimming feature. The biggest problem right off the bat is they've got so many layers. You should see. It's got like 30 layers of junk in there. Each one of those layers hurts the image a little bit, but more importantly, they're blocking 80% of the light before you start. So you're wearing effectively dark sunglasses as soon as you put it on. That's before you do any other dimming. The part of the problem with most of these dimming type things, anything that's reasonably fast switching, generally is liquid crystal. It means you got to put a polarizer in there. A polarizer is going to block about 60% of the light before you start. And that's the same problem you have with bird bath. So basically, it's kind of like from a bright light transmissiveness point, they start almost as bad as bird bath optics and then get worse because they've also got diffractive elements in there that block light. And then you have this other problem, as Jeri alluded to, you're going to have a crosshatch in there. So when you look at stuff like anything that's got a light source or fairly bright or reflects anything, you're going to see all kinds of like starbursts and stuff. Those are diffraction effects. And I've got that on my blog too. It's talked about in their own patents. And so, yeah, it doesn't. Here's the other fun thing I did. I think I figured out with roughly what I expect their dimming pixel to be. A single dimming pixel is going to block is going to affect about several thousand pixels worth of image in the real world. So it's like very imprecise. So you get this very fine blur. Now, yes, it does work in the sense that people will report that, yeah, it makes things look better. But remember, you're starting at 20% light throughput. 80% of the light from the real world is being blocked. Whereas I liked it when the CEO was saying that they're in an operating room and the lights are so bright. And I'm like, yeah, they're bright for a reason, because they want to stop your pupil down so you can see really well and you can see into dark cavities. I don't think you really want if you went into your surgery room, you don't really want a guy operating on you with dark sunglasses. There's a reason why those lights are so bright. So they're going to make the lights 5 times brighter than already? So you get a suntan while you're in there working on surgery? I don't know.
Karl, I think something else to think about is like the cost of all of this. Like someday we need AR glasses that don't cost $3,500. And when you have 30 layers of, exotic materials in there. It's going to be very difficult to get the cost down, and how fragile it is too. A lot of these, high index glass that they use for these world combiners, extremely brittle materials. So,
Yeah, I think there's a shout out for Lux XL. They're one of the guys. There's some other companies working on this, but Lux XL is doing some stuff where they can encapsulate waveguides in a reasonably rugged plastic. I think that, and they can build optics into it. However, I think those things are probably going to cost $50 to $100 a lens, in production, because each one's a custom printed lens. But they can, it's neat that they build the optics and stuff into it. So there are some things going on there. Once again, if you're being more modest in your goals and not trying to solve all the world's problems. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's tough.
Is eye tracking going to be a fundamental component of user experience? And how difficult is it to implement properly into a headset?
That's a good question. I haven't really found anything super compelling from a user experience that just demands eye tracking. All of our experiments back in the day is that you try to use it for a user interface, it makes the world's most frustrating user experience. I do believe there's, well, you would try to like gaze on an icon or something.
That's a really bad idea. Yeah.
Your eyes saccading around. It's just like, it's really frustrating. I think there's probably some added benefit to, observe what the user's doing and feed that back into either your game or into your UI to give more inferred intention a little bit more. But
yeah, I've got two answers. One is the Big Brother aspect.
Oh yeah,
it's really useful for all the Big Brother guys to know exactly what you're looking at. There's a lot of marketing data you can collect if you go to a grocery store, and they can tell where you're dwelling. There've been products based on this, on tracking your eyes to know what you're looking at. But from a practical point of view, it turns out if you really want to have good SLAM, particularly over range, one of the big problems, people think, hey, if we could just lock on the real world, but I'm actually dealing with somebody right now who's got this problem, is that one of the problems you have is if I'm trying to lock on the real world, how do you know exactly where the eye is lined up? You have a parallax problem, that the display is someplace up here with your eye wobbling around, and the real world's out there someplace. And if your glasses are moving a little bit and your eyes moving a little bit, you can have quite a big the delta error is huge for where you think you're looking. You see this even when we do pass-through AR. I was looking at this with Link, something I'm looking at in their videos. You can see how they can't precisely line up your hand. It's one thing to block your hand. They can pass through something on top of it with pass-through AR. But now what if your hand is blocking something in the virtual world? Well, it doesn't line up perfectly because your eye, they get kind of crude about it because you can't line up. So there's a lot into eye tracking. I think eye tracking is an interesting area, but it's necessarily not sufficient. I think the thing that's more interesting going on in the world today is SLAM, of all the things for recognizable. That technology has a long way to go, and I think there's a lot to do for image recognition and cameras going out. I think the display going in stuff, or the display stuff, is going to remain difficult.
Question from Juan David Hincapi Ramos. Jeri or Karl, what do you think about Cura?
I haven't seen Cura. I've seen similar displays. I haven't had a great experience with the pin light, embedded little reflector type displays. I don't know if they're onto something to solve the issues of, all of these overlapping exit pupils that kind of mangle the display. And then my experience also looking at some of these pin light type displays is like, because you have these little tiny round reflectors everywhere, it causes the transmissive view of your world to get kind of mangled up too.
Yeah, it goes back to my Mojo Vision thing. Yeah, I've put some of these on my website, I think, too, from Lecton AR. They're the ones who pioneered it. I think that's where Kura got the idea for the pin mirror. The other issue they have is the idea of scanning micro LEDs. They've got two things. They're looking at kind of a variation on what Lecton AR is doing with the multiple mirrors. And as she says, if you look at the real world, this gets back to Mojo Vision too. It's a very similar problem. They have these tiny little mirrors that are about the same size as Mojo Vision's optics, and you can see the mirrors. That's why I happen to know that can be a problem. Then the other issue is they're scanning micro LEDs. Well, they were supposed to be here a couple of years ago. I think they have a degree of optimism brought about by the need to raise money. Sometimes the way I describe it, the scanning process, how do you get those LEDs to be bright enough and scan fast enough and make that work? And who's really working with them? Who's going to sell this little startup technology that other people haven't been able to get? The one thing I do like about it, though, there's one gem inside there that I do like. Going back to our problem with LEDs and the non-uniformity of them, I definitely could see vibrating. Going back, and this also goes back to DigiLens. I don't think the wobulation for resolution's sake is a good idea. I just don't. But I do think that there may be something for trying to average out LEDs. If we have this real huge variance in LED to LED, you could see we're vibrating the LEDs or moving the LEDs so that for each pixel in display is actually covered by multiple LEDs, might have some promise in terms of combating the LED to LED variance. Imagine if you have if you move 10 pixels, well, now each LED is contributing 1/10 of the light. So if you have a bad LED and 9 good LEDs, well, then you're kind of okay.
Maybe we should go back to the Virtual Boy with the fluttering mirror.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not talking about trying to do the whole thing. I'm talking about, moving just a few pixels in a frame and vibrating it.
I mean, that was used back in the days. You then
get back to all these other problems, like do you cause vibration? Do you have mechanical problems? You now got something moving. Do you try to move it digitally, like with DigiLens? And can you move it far enough, fast enough to make it happen?
That's a good point. The old microvision projectors, if you just whack the side of these projectors, they'll shut off because you've changed the resonance of the mirrors and you have to wait for them to spin back up. There's challenges there of
that's the other problem. You have almost all micro mirrors. The high-speed ones is some level of resonance. They can't really control that speed very well. You can maybe influence a little bit with the energy you put into it, but they don't. They're kind of locked into a speed range, at least in one direction. Usually the flyback, like on horizontal, the high-speed one almost always near resonance in the vertical one. And I really don't believe in the Lissajous pattern guys. The Lissajous scattering, that's like a new variant that's come up. And I don't see how you ever get an image out of that looks good.
Maybe we should spin fiber optics in a spiral. What do you think?
Yeah, I've written about that. That's another stupid idea. The level of due diligence that was done on Magic Leap is a scandal. It just shows you that nobody was doing due diligence. That was micro. In my opinion, Magic Leap started with pure snake oil. The two big concepts they have both broke down, and could have been anybody should have understood at the time they sold it. So whoever put that money in there shows you that the due diligence was a joke.
What are your thoughts on the rumors?
Sorry for being so unequivocal, so waffling on that one so much.
What are your thoughts on the HoloLens rumors of a directionless next generation product?
What rumors on HoloLens? Well, the one that they kind of diverted a bit.
Correct. Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of the big guys left, like Bernie Kress left, and he's one of the most famous guys they had, and they've had several other people leave. Now there's some churn just going on. Looks like Google's getting back in the game again. They're ramping up. HoloLens seems to have come to the realization that this is not going to be a big market. So, they kind of moved it off to the Azure cloud stuff. It's almost like a loss leader technology. And I've always said, you don't want to be on a loss leader product. The problem with loss leaders is eventually the bean counters sit there and say, why are we losing money on this? Let's do things to make money. You probably figure every time you buy a HoloLens 2, Microsoft loses thousands of dollars. If you just buy one as you're not buying Azure Cloud, but if you buy one to use the headset, the joke was Magic Leap probably cost on the order of $500,000 per unit sold. They put $500,000 in R&D into every unit that went out the door with cash that people paid for. A lot of those units were given away for free, given the this and that and the other thing, developers and trying to seed the market. That's the problem right now. Most AR companies are losing money. They're betting on the come. The guys who made money big are the guys. Palmer Luckey and the guys at Oculus made well, but they got made well by being sold. The guys who made money in AR so far have been sold to big companies.
What are some of the technologies surrounding the Tilt 5 that made it a magical experience, Karl?
That must be our marketing people in chat.
Yeah. Okay. It's not trying to be ultimate everything for everybody. What's magical about it is, I think, the way they lock. I really came in, as I said, I went in with low expectations. At the same conference, I went in for low expectations for both Tilt 5 and for laser scanning. And the laser scanning guys managed to get under that bar by quite a bit. It was really disappointing compared to what, and I came in with low expectations. In the case of Tilt 5, what made it magical is how well it locks to the world. They've turned the problem inside out. I don't think it's general purpose. In other words, this is not going to replace your cell phone. If you're in that ballpark. But for what they're trying to do, it's amazing how well it locked. You don't have the vergence accommodate. We haven't even talked about vergence accommodation conflict. People can't even build a damn decent display and they're worried about vergence accommodation conflict. Another big thing with Magic Leap. But it locked it really well. I had no problems using it. It was amazing how well it just worked. That's what made it magical to me, is it just kind of worked. And, they're using a reflective display so that and they're kind of inside out. But because of that, things work like the way you block, like occlusion. It works because it actually occludes. Because if you can block the light, because the projector is coming out roughly where the eye is centered, it kind of works. So it just, things work, which was what made it magical. I've seen a lot of things that don't, I've seen a lot more expensive systems that don't kind of just work as well. So that's what made it magical to me, is just when you did things, it behaved the way it should.
Karl, I was scared when I saw you in the demo line. I'm like, this is it. Karl's going to flay us, leave us out to die on the sidewalk. And I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, I'm still, by the way, on the downside, I'm still waiting. I ordered that day. I literally ordered one. I'm still waiting for it. So I still have to wait for you'll still have to wait for my in-depth review till I get one shipped. I know you're shipping them now, and then with all the problems in China and elsewhere, it's difficult.
Well, if you're going to dissect it, let me send you a factory reject so you don't throw all the calibrations out of the good unit.
No, but it's a very inside out thing. And as I said, the other thing I see for it is like sand table. I could see like the military guy. There's a lot of guys who want to do what I call sand tables. Their technology works, but I think mostly in the vertical. It has to be, a horizontal table-like setup. It works really well. I don't think it's going to work real well in the vertical where you're looking at like a wall. It's not a replacement for a monitor. I get asked that a lot. It's not a replacement for a monitor, but in its genre of what it's doing, it seems to work quite well.
Ed is, he wrote a statement, I think. It's a retro reflective surface. Could you allude to that, Jeri?
Yeah, so the inside out solving the problem that Karl's talking about is, so instead of trying to put the light directly into your eyes, which is very difficult, as Karl says time and time again, I actually stumbled onto this property of being able to generate displays, this volumetric display on retroreflector completely by accident back in the days when I worked at Valve. It took many years to just kind of put my head around like, yeah, we could actually turn this into a fantastic AR display. So by projecting out to the game board, which retroreflects, which means the light comes directly back to the user, you end up having a lot of really good properties. So vergence accommodation works correctly. Eye box is the entire size of the lens. Eye relief is almost infinite on it. All the things that you want for an out-of-box experience where you just slip the glasses on and it just works. Would I like to make an AR display someday where I can walk down the road and have dragons pop in out of buildings? Yes, of course. But this is amazing for today and it works great. And we're going to put a lot of work into productizing this and delighting millions of people.
Yeah, and little things like occlusion, which would be, you can't believe how hard occlusion is. And yet, well, because the projector is projecting from your eye, more or less, you get pretty good alignment. But also, because your hand is not retroreflective, if you put your hand out there, your hand occludes. It works.
For free.
There's a lot of things that got me after the fact. I was trying to, in my own head, because I only got a short use of it. And that's why I ordered one right away, is that there's a lot of things weirdly with the human factors that just seem to work that don't work with other technologies that require things work. But now the limitation, I think, may be in the screen itself, because it's a beaded screen, very high gain, which will tend to cause, in theory, will cause speckle or a little bit of speckle and stuff, even if there's no lasers involved. But it's still it is fun in how well it works, and I can see why so many people had so much belief in it. I mean, I heard about it for what, about a decade. You've been working on it.
I've been working on it for quite a while. Yeah.
And
Karl, I love that the next day you came back, kind of almost giddy, which was kind of cool to see. But Karl came back.
I was sending people over to see it.
Karl came back with pieces of retroreflector. I'm like, who travels with retroreflector? And got back in line, and you spent what, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, like, messing around.
Yeah, I wanted to see. I already had bought one by that point. I'd ordered one, I should say. I haven't bought one yet. I've ordered one, and I was trying to see if I could use my own retro screens and stuff. I actually, I don't know if I bought it for that. I use it for some other stuff. I use it sometimes. I'll glue retroreflector on stuff so you can put a flashlight in there and find it easily.
Karl, question from
I've been looking at you since the Cast 5 days. I've at least been following.
Oh, wow.
The Cast AR, I should say.
Question from B. Why do you think Tilt 5 will perform worse for a retroreflective wall or screen than on a table? What is the physics that work against this case? Setting aside font, legibility, etc., just first or third person game versus board game?
Actually, I have opinions. I think it will work fine for wall type experiences. The thing is, when you start to compare it, are we competing against a LCD screen that's 8K with really high contrast ratio? It's kind of not the business that we want to be in. We don't want to be competing against regular displays. But if you want a volumetric display that you can look directly into and have this kind of infinite view, it works, right? Within the limitations of how we've designed it. In my opinion, I really get excited about people sitting around the table, having a shared social experience with, you hate to use the word holograms, but holograms popping up out of the table that you can directly interact with. That's a little bit more compelling to me personally than, having a wall display. We already have, developers and folks that have bought our system that are doing vertical type experiences and having a great time with it. So to solve their problems, it does just fine within the limits of what we can provide.
I'll be curious to see if I think a lot of the reason why the vergence accommodation works is because you're at that angle, and much of the distance is going there. I'm not sure the vergence accommodation is going to work so well going into the screen, because I think, and that's why I want to get one.
It's true. You're absolutely right, Karl. It's within kind of this volume in front of you on the table where things really, it's the sweet spot for it. So if you project way out into infinity or close to your nose in a vertical screen, it doesn't work nearly as well for vergence accommodation as it does within our form factor that we promote the most.
Yeah, I think from a point of view of physics, so you still have, what happens is, even though you're very high gain, it's basically a super high gain screen, it still becomes real. The distance to the screen is actually set. Mm-hmm. And then you have just a small variable distance in and above. It works really well into the thing. And you only have a small variable distance, which is not that far off from a vergence accommodation point of view. Whereas if you were looking straight on, then when you do that, I think you will have, I don't think the vergence accommodation will work. It'll be verged at the screen, which is the same problem you have in the movie theater. Vergence accommodation became really popular problem with 3D screens, because you have a problem that the screen is the distance it is, and that's where the eyes will verge. Yet the accommodation, the focus will say, but it's way far away. So the vergence accommodation conflict is your brain, one set of inputs says based on focus, it's distance A, and based on where the focus is way out there, but the eyes are telling me it's here. That's why when things get close in there, you get headaches and all on stuff, because your eyes are verging, but your focus is telling you that it's way far away. I think I don't know that you'll get that same benefit. That's why I say in the tabletop, I know works. It works really well, and it gives you a very good effect. You don't get the kind of problems that I can't wear, for example, the Quest 2. God, 5 minutes, I'm already getting kind of sick wearing it. But I wore those for a while, and I had no feel. There's just nothing. It does work, and it's kind of surprising how simple it is, and it works. But once again, I do believe, in my opinion, is it's in a bit of a box. Although the box is a little bigger, in that there's a lot of uses for sand tabling. Not just military is famous for doing sand tables, but also in the industrial world and whatnot. When you want to, let's say I want a map of something in 3D depth and all, I think it's going to work great for stuff like that. I'm just not I'm skeptical about the vertical. We'll have to see.
All right.
So it's 8:04. Would love to pull back and ask a broader question to both of you before we close up. What is the ultimate vision for AR, and how do we go about reaching mass consumer adoption?
Oh my God. I just want to reduce it down to, like, we have to solve a problem out there. And I think there's a lot of problems to be solved, and it's not going to be one device solves them all. So to reach mass market, I think we're going to see a lot of devices that are application specific to these problems. Tilt 5's great for tabletop gaming. Magic Leap HoloLens is great for what they do in real. And I don't think there is one, Apple's not going to release an AR headset that solves all problems instantly. It's just not going to happen. Where it goes in the long run, I don't have a crystal ball that goes that far out.
Yeah, I used to say my crystal ball is good for 10 years, and I can see about 10 years out with it. And I think that the idea of AR replacing your cell phone ain't in the next 10 years. It's not even close. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff if you're willing, like I say, if you're willing to limit your field of view. I was really fairly impressed with like some of the latest stuff I saw with DigiLens and with Avegant. Avegant was using DispelX waveguides. That was pretty impressive. One of the things they stopped was this front projection. I was really impressed. Actually, the most impressive thing was they had a waveguide that doesn't front project. So does Loomis. Loomis is also very good on lack of front projection. I don't think you're going to go out in the world with glowing, front projections where the eyes look like they're glowing. So I don't think you're going out in the world with that. So the diffractive guys are working on it. Loomis has got that. I think you've got to be bright enough, because a lot of these applications will involve going outdoors. I see a lot of, and Vuzix is kind of working in this area too, just to name drop a few companies working on this. But, the idea of kind of the industrial environment where you're not trying to be this immersive game. I think a lot of AR got off track going after video games. And that's where Magic Leap just dove in deep, and they'll be clawing to get out, because I don't think Magic Leap 2 is a twit designed for industrial. It's just, hey, we did our second generation consumer, and it's way too expensive for consumers, so now it's an industrial or an enterprise product. But I think you're going to see a lot more in that area, maybe where if you're willing to get 30-degree field of view, there's guys are doing some things that are pretty small and light and can be fairly rugged. So I think we'll see a lot in the kind of specialty use area, because it's possible now. Stuff you couldn't do 2 or 3 years ago, they made a lot of progress in. But I'm as skeptical as I've been in a long time on what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. I think they're going to have our time. And then the question is, and this has always been the problem in this market, the big boys, the big names, they think that that VR is not big enough for them. That they don't get up in the morning. I think, they can't see a big enough end number, even if it's unlike, they see a real number. So there's a real market for VR, but it's just not big enough to excite them. They don't get their jollies off of tens of millions of units. They want a market that's in the billions. And AR in theory gets them there, but nobody knows how to get there. I don't think the physics get there. There's just so, I say there's like 20 deadly problems. If anyone solves one of them, they got 19 to go. But there are some problems that are physics killer, like this whole occlusion thing. I'm not sure it's possible. I think it violates laws of physics to solve hard edge occlusion. Really good occlusion is not possible. And that right there is like one of the most important big problems. There are probably 10 problems that may be impossible to solve. So and I lived through home computers. I grew up believing in home computers. I believed it. I saw it. I worked in that area. It was going to happen. I'm not a lot of, people said you just don't have enough imagination. I don't think my imagination's gone down. I think my reality quotient's gone up.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I'll open up the polls now just for fun.
I'm sorry, I dominated a bit too much. That's kind of my bad.
No, we love hearing both of your thoughts.
I was doomed.
It was fascinating hearing your thoughts. It
was so fun, Karl.
Oh, it always is fun talking to you.
We have Bradley Lynch speaking at our next meetup, and he released these renders of the Cambria. By the way, I launched the poll, so feel free to answer. I don't know if you can give like accurate thoughts just from an image, but what do you think of this rendering here?
Yeah, it's probably the pancake optics thing.
Yeah.
What everyone's expecting. Pancake optics are not necessarily a piece of cake. They solve thickness, but they tend to have a lot of double images.
Yeah, and if you use a small display, then the eye box becomes very fiddly. It's kind of tricky for the end user if your eye box is small.
Awesome. Well, we received the votes are in and the poll is closed. It looks like, and I'm going to share the results. I'll stop sharing my screen. It looks like the winner of tonight's event was Jeri Ellsworth.
Congratulations.
It was rigged. It was rigged.
Yeah. Congratulations, Jeri.
It pays to be more optimistic.
Karl definitely. Karl
maybe you're too
crushed
negative.
me in facts.
What's that?
Karl definitely crushed me in facts. So.
You were both excellent, and I really enjoyed hearing both of your perspectives on the industry.
It was so fun.
So
fun.
It was always fun talking with Jeri.
Thank you, Karl.
Karl, I look forward to a rematch over something.
Or something. Yeah.
Maybe not optics next time.
Yeah.
Retro video games or something.
Oh, I don't know. That's a long ways back for me now. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining. I hope you had a good time, Karl. I hope you had a good time, Jeri, discussing. I think it was really fun. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I really
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yes. Thank you.
Recording is not available yet. Andy, everyone wants recordings.
Karl, you're the man. I hope the poll didn't.
Nah, I'm always more negative, and I'm always stepping on people's toes. Plus, I talked over Jeri too much. I gotta.
No, it was fun. It was fun, and plus I rigged it. It was probably all my Twitter followers.
I knew it.
Well,
Karl.
also there were probably some Microvision people on the line, and they vote me down all the time.
Yeah.
If I get on Reddit, you can tell when the Microvision people mafia jumps in. They just hate me.
I'm gonna get my $100 from Microvision after the show. Hey,
We
Karl,
invited all the people you write about to the meetup tonight, Karl. So they could have been part of that voting as well.
Hey, Karl, are you going to?
Where it says Microvision bring the pitchfork? MBET, did you see this? I don't know where this note came from. MT, who's MT? He said Microvision bring the pitchforks.
Microvision shouldn't like me too much because I recruited like half their team out of them into Valve back in the day. Like
that's their whole marketing strategy. Yes, that's how they got it. That's how they got it into HoloLens. Basically, these guys secured their stock options by joining Microsoft and convincing them to use Microvision. But I mean, any objective measure, that thing ended up a disaster. I mean, they spent a ton of money for a very poor quality image. I mean, my favorite thing to do is just compare HoloLens 1 versus HoloLens 2. And it's like, you could have just gone incremental. They could have just gone incremental and done vastly better than going. It's a grass is greener, grasping at straws problem. People are saying, oh, well, what we're doing is not working well enough. We'll go use this other technology. And it's like, yeah, just use it harder. And it's like, I mean, they probably spent, I'm guessing HoloLens spent nearly as much money as Microvision had in the last 10 years. They spent more in a year than Microvision spent in 10. Time to wave. Yeah.
Well, maybe I just died a little bit.
Sleep for what, about 30 minutes or something?
Hey, Karl, are you going to AWE in a few weeks?
I'm planning on going there. Yes, I've got the plane tickets. I've got a hotel reservation, and I'm in the conference's press.
Yeah, if you want to come by the office sometime, if you have come a day early or a day after, let me know.
I may be able to do that. I'm going to see my son. My son he works for Xilinx, which is now AMD.
Ooh.
So my son lives out there. But yeah, I might be able to on the day before. I'm there the whole time, but I'm flying in like midday the day before.
Oh yeah, the day before may not work because we'll probably be setting up. There'll probably be chaos.
Are you going to be at the show again?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure we are. It was a pretty good event for us.
It was good for you. You got lots of good. I saw several people got to see it. You impressed also the guy, Matthew Olson at the Information, I think was impressed by it too. So you impressed a few people. Everyone who saw it. I was sending people around to it because I thought it was better than
more.
I wouldn't. You were in the back of the floor and all, and so it was a ways back there to do it. I was been wanting to see it for the longest time because I'd known about you from Cast 5, and I'd heard your story on the AR show. I thought that.
Tell you, I was scared. Have to admit it. Well,
you're the opposite. You're about the antithesis of the Theranos in terms of. It's like these. What kills me in this business is how many good people can't raise money for spit, and how the con artists. That's just like it's like almost some of the guys who raise the big money. It's insane. Like how Abovitz raised all that money for Magic Leap, and it's really he's hated. The whole Magic Leap's hated throughout the industry. Because he soaked up all the money, raised expectations unrealistically, and then crashed everybody. And so he both sucked up the money, and then when he crashed, nobody wanted to invest.
We definitely felt that.
But I think it'll be interesting to see how long what's how long Apple can string people along, and well, they keep saying, yeah, maybe next year, but I just don't know how they get around the physics of AR. You get the things like, well, blue is invisible. You really can't do good image. I think the problem's going to be is people have this image from the movies that's done in post. Well, they don't physics. When you do things in post-processing, like in the movie compositing after the fact, you can do things that aren't physically possible.
Well, what I find funny about movies is they always show AR like glitching out and translucent and really staticky. And then we go show our device and there's like a little glitch and they're like, especially investors, I don't know, the quality is just not good enough. Like, well, we'll solve that glitch. And like, I don't know. It's like,
yeah, well,
it's a double-edged sword. Movies show kind of like crappy AR most of the time, but then the bar is really high for expectations of what you're actually going to deliver.
Yeah, well, the thing for you too, your issue becomes that you're not the infinite market. You're not the replacement for the cell phone. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem we face, is that people are looking for this cell phone replacement. And I think we're a long I think we're a long way. Look at the glasses. I even heard people, I didn't get them, but the Meta Facebook glasses, they said they were the Ray-Bans, they were too heavy. They said even as for just audio was too heavy. They said, yeah, they look like they're the same, but they're kind of heavy. I'm like, yeah, and they haven't put any display in them yet.
Yikes.
Yeah. And then you want to do all this stuff. See, this is the problem. You layer it on because it's like, well, do you want to do glasses that just do a little informational display? No. I need all this slam and everything. And I want 50-degree field of view. Or no. Well, then you got all the experts. These are the beautiful things experts say. They say, yeah, it's got to be like 90-degree field of view or I don't even want it. Well, if you're waiting for 90-degree field of view and a see-through glasses, you're going to be waiting a while for something and it's going to look like crap, because almost invariably, the only way they can expand the field of view is to give up on other things like uniformity and whatnot.
I like to call it like squeezing the balloon. Like if you want to shrink one part of an AR system, you squeeze it and some other part's going to bulge out. Like,
yeah, that's my 20 problems. Basically, almost invariably, when you fix one of those 20 problems, you severely impact a bunch of other problems. So you're packing that snowball. But yeah, it's just, I can't in all honesty see even a path to getting there. There's so many problems that are so huge. And I've been watching this thing. People don't know it, but I actually, my first AR experience was back in 98. I joined a little startup called, what was it called? Silicon Display. It was founded by Jeri Rogers, who founded Cyrex and stuff like that. It brought me out of TI, which was one of the worst financial moves I've ever made. Got in the startup world just in time for the dot-com bust. But we were working on it was a boom. It wasn't see-through at that time, but it was an LCOS LED illuminated display. That's how I got into LCOS. And, we had it, but you couldn't raise money. Basically, the dot-com bust killed us because you couldn't raise money. But so I've been watching it though. So I've been in and out of this and watching this now for 24 years now. It's not moving as fast as people think.
What industry does though, you look at almost every industry. I love looking at the Computer Chronicles from like early 80s, talking about the computer industry, how it's going to evolve so fast and everyone's going to have a PDA in their pocket in 4 years. And,
it did move. I joined TI in 77. And man, it's like 4 years before the IBM PC. The Apple, I think, is just about out in that time frame. Boy, things were moving. You could just see the movement. But you could also, even by the early 80s, people were talking about the wall. You hear about Moore's Law. Moore's Law has always been fictionalized and mutated to keep fitting the curve. They mutate the law to fit the curve, the curve, right? The curve. So what they keep mutating what Moore's Law meant to keep a curve going, because the problem was you were approaching physics limits, And we are today. Today, things are moving very slow. It's very hard now. You know, I had a VP friend at TI, and I was then for lunch, you know, after I left, and he said, yeah, it used to be that we make things smaller and they got faster and lower power. Now we make things smaller and they don't
consume more power.
Yeah, they consume more power, they don't get faster, and they cost more. It's like you can't, you know, it's like, because you're running up against it. Because when I joined, we could get a IC done, a mask set. You know, mask set first release was between $100,000 and $200,000. I believe this is years ago. This is like 10 years ago. A state-of-the-art mask set was over $5 million, $5 to $10 million for a mask set. Yep. All of a sudden, now you're not a startup. No, basically back then, startups, that's back in the 80s, we had all these Cyrexes and all the little foundless semiconductor companies. You could be that. When your mask sets are hundreds of thousands of dollars, even adjusted for inflation, that's not too bad. Today, when your mask set costs you $10 million, you can't make a mistake. And then you have to say, well, how big a design team am I going to have? If my mask alone, the mask set to make that first silicon is $10 million, I'm not going to even start a program that's not $100, $200, $300 million program.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so exactly.
All of a sudden, you've eliminated startups totally. So we kind of had this bell curve in startups where startups were really, really big. And then now everybody's in FPGAs and stuff because you can't afford to do a custom chip unless the volume's huge. Or in the case of LCOS, we were running like 3 to 4 generations old technology. Ironically, it was funny when I was at Syndiant back in the mid 2005, 2006, our mask sets were about 100,000, 200,000. It was about the same number, same cost, because I was running like 4 or 5 generations behind state of the art. However, we went to do an ASIC, and the ASIC cost like a couple of $1 million because we were only like 2 or 3 generations behind state of the art. So we're using high tech.
No wonder all of these
super trailing edge technology. It was starting to cost millions of dollars to do a mask set. So all of a sudden that changed.
No wonder all of the LCOS manufacturers we talk to, when we say we don't want their ASIC, they get frustrated.
No, we spent a lot of money, but it's the problem. No, the reason why they don't want you to use their ASIC is because you're a pain in the ass to them.
No. Whenever we ask them, oh, we just don't want your ASIC. We want to drive it directly. They're like, oh, but that's where all our money is.
No, not in our case. Our case was we'd have been happy to let you do it at Syndia. Our problem would be what a support burden you're going to be.
Yeah,
we're going to have to explain to you every little nitty. I'm going to have to explain things to you that we don't have to explain to a guy who buys the ASIC. You put the video in that comes out. We're going to have to explain to you every little nitty hidden trick, every little trick we use. We have to explain to you because you will never be able to drive it. Many of these devices are really tricky to drive. Plus, LCOS itself is tricky to drive. So, you know, it would be a lot of work. A lot of times people don't get this too. People say, why won't they sell me a chip? Like, where do I go to buy an LCOS chip? I said, nobody's going to sell it to you unless you're a big company, because they're going to sit there and say, to support you, it's going to cost you as much to support a guy who wants 10 for a science project as it going to cost to support a big company. Which guy we're going to buy? I mean, by the way, this is your problem today. Going back to the industry, why the industry's in trouble is, okay, I figure today maybe see-through displays, there's maybe outside 200,000 units a year. Outside 200,000 units a year. And you sit there and say, well, how many guys are working on displays? Well, there are about 20 of them. How many guys are working on optics? Well, probably about 30 or 40 of them. And I'm like, okay, 200,000 units, divide that by 20. You don't get, you're getting 10,000 units a piece. Who's building these display devices to sell 10,000 units a year? Mm-hmm. That's the killer problem. That's why, like, Compound Photonics got sold. They had themselves on the block for a while. Plessy got sold. They actually had the same investors. Plessy and Compound Photonics had the same investment group. So I figured Compound Photonics wasn't long for this world. But they probably did okay because they got sold out. But those are the only guys who've made money right now. Anyway,
we should let Andy and Barry get out of here. They're East
Coast.
We
ought to get going.
But Karl, next time we talk privately, let me tell you about a story about TI and displays. I think you'll find it fun.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
probably shouldn't do it publicly though.
This was what year?
2012 or so.
Oh, I was long gone by then. Yeah. If it had anything to do with displays between 77 and 98, then I knew about it, but usually was pretty heavily involved. But after that, I was gone. But yeah, they were, TI got, I'm not sure well, they're an analog. Today, they're not even in DLP really. DLP is just that's a business they can't get rid of. It's not worth, you can't sell it. It still makes cash. It's basically a cash cow business. They don't invest in it anymore per se, a little bit to keep it running and just keep it alive because they sell it, but they're not betting on the come anymore. I think they're pretty, they've lived it. Plus my old boss was Rich Templeton. So he's back to being, I think he's still chairman and CEO again. They had a little Me Too problem or something and he came back. Yes. But anyway, but he was my boss, and I don't, he's not if you think I'm a Debbie Downer on this stuff, you should have seen him. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe in anything. He only believed in money.
Hey guys, just to close it off, question from Eric. And this was asked recently. If wearable AR worked perfectly, how would you want it to be worn? Glasses, B, contact lenses, C, mobile phone, D, something else? And he also asked prior to this question, what's the best way to clean an augmented reality display?
So I have a strong opinion about that. And I tell my team this quite frequently. I really don't care about the display. I'm about the experience. Like, how do I get the holograms on the table? And if I could come up with some kind of magic pixel dust that I sprinkle on the table and a display pops out of it, that's what we'd be selling, because we're about selling the experience. I actually think there are some interesting display techs coming way down the road where you can generate a light field just from a display you throw on the table. I mean, Looking Glass is a very simplistic view of that, but there might be some options out there, really difficult to pull off. But
yeah, I think, I mean, light fields are a whole nother problem in terms of how much content you have to generate to get the image that you want. You could see a combination of eye tracking and light fields where you use the eye tracking to cull it down, but then what do you do if you have a lot of people looking at it? You look at everybody and then you're back to the same problem. The problem is I don't think contacts ever happen. I almost think it's going to be easier to tap into the optic nerve.
Maybe.
than to solve all I think there's some physics problems that never get solved in even in glasses. I think glasses are pretty workable for the industrial environment. So I think you can get away with glasses for military, industrial, enterprise stuff. So I think we'll see glasses there. Then the question is, how good does it have to be? The problem is, as soon as you start saying, well, I want a big field of view and I want SLAM, well, what are you going to do with SLAM? You better put tracking out there. And everybody wants inside out tracking. Well, if you want inside out tracking, now I've got to have a ring of cameras and stuff because I can't do inside out tracking with just a camera. You need some physical distance between the cameras to do really good tracking and stuff. And if you want to see the hands, well, I got to have down looking cameras. And before you're done, you're into an open helmet. So I kind of see the market for like glasses, like form factors, when the informational content, keep it down to 30 degrees and there's some neat things you can do. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of SLAM, a lot of vision stuff. That's a market that's, I think, going to keep growing because cameras are cheap. It's all about processing and intelligence and stuff that scales well. Unfortunately, displays just don't scale well. It's this thing of people say everything follows Moore's law. Well, there's even some of the big names in the industry have said optics doesn't follow Moore's law. What really happens, See, I learned the TI, we used to call it the learning curve.
I think we should call it Karl's law for optics.
I like that.
No, it's a learning curve. And what we used to say at TI was there's a rate at which costs decrease for every doubling of volume. And there's a lot to that. And what happened with semiconductors, we had a lot of doublings from even the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. We had a lot of doublings. And because of that, things got a lot cheaper for the same level of stuff. By the way the doubling works, by the way, is you can move on one axis. You either get cheaper or more capable, but you don't normally get cheaper, more capable in the doubling and everything. Although you get enough doublings in there, you start to move on. You seem like you're moving on both axes. But anyway, the problem you have is how do you keep doubling this thing? How are we going to have 400,000 units next year? How are we going to have 1 million the year after that? I don't see that how you get that doubling going that gets that learning curve going. The problem with optics is some things, the slope of every technology has its own curve or its own slope. That's the other part people forget. People just remember semiconductors. Semiconductors had like the best possible slope. They were a huge way from the limits of physics. The problem with optics are you're really up against it. Optics are pretty old. How are you going to double the optics volume? How are you going to improve it a whole lot? They're really up against the fit. Their curve is very flat. Yes, they will get cheaper if you double their volume, but they're not going to get like half as expensive by doubling their volume. It doesn't get that way. So that's the problem we're up against. Is too many different things within AR don't have they're bumping up against physics. Like say with pixels, we're already at the fraction limits. The pixel sizes are already fighting diffraction. So how do you make pixels smaller? So if you want to have a bigger resolution, we have to now make the display bigger. Well, how do we do that?
Lasers.
What?
Lasers.
Lasers, yeah.
Hey, I have an answer for cleaning AR systems. My favorite is the Zeiss optical wipes, the moist ones, but do not use them after they've dried out. They can be a little abrasive. So you can get them off Amazon. I think they have a little bit of alcohol in them, so they dry and they work really well.
And almost with all optical devices, never clean them dry. Always use a liquid cleaner. And you got to make sure it's a liquid that's compatible with whatever plastics you're using. Some of the things that are good for cleaning glass, like one of the best cleaners in the world is what's the stuff?
Ammonia?
No, not alcohol, but the other stuff. But it'll leak right through plastic. Yeah, those are good. I'm sure those are good.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically, you're left with what you really want is like really dry alcohol is good. If you can get alcohol with no water in it, it's good. What makes alcohol smear is the water content. Like the water you buy at the drugstore is like 70%. It's got like 30% water in it. That 30% water we'll call streaking.
Yeah, the killer for AR headsets and optics or VR headsets is just grease coming off of your body, and you need to cut that with alcohol to get it off. If you just kind of use a little terry cloth or something, you just smear it around and you make almost like how they used to do films to do that soft focus for romantic scenes. You just end up with Vaseline.
You don't want to ever do with optics is wipe them with a dry cloth because it's going to grind the microscopic, whatever the grind that's there, it grinds it into the surface. So you definitely would you always actually even fogging your glass, like if you're going to clean them, just doing the fogging on them helps a lot. But always have some level of moisture on any optical surface you try to clean.
I worked with an optical engineer quite a few years ago that it was hilarious. He was probably the worst as far as optical hygiene. Yeah, I was always ribbing him. I'm like, how did you become an optical engineer when you touch every surface with your fingers? Took a while to break him of touching the front surfaces of lenses and mirrors. It's another thing. It's just don't touch it. Like that's always a good rule.
It's really hard when you put these big surfaces in front of people's faces.
Yeah, until 5, we had to put a lot of thought into that. Like, how do we actually put protective sheets of plastic far enough away from the projectors, so even if you get a a fingerprint on it, the fingerprint's not going to impact the image too much. Like if you have a very small optical element, one fingerprint can have a huge impact on the visual quality. So actually, when you look at our designs, like why is there, you know, this cover over the projector so far away from the projectors? Like, yeah, we had to make it immune to someone like getting their finger up in there and getting a little bit of grease on that. So it didn't.
By the way, if you know that everything, and I mean 100% of everything in your optics is glass, then acetone is great. But if there's any rubber, any plastic, anything in the vicinity of it, you'll just create a smear and it'll destroy any plastics.
I've always wanted one of these dry ice optics cleaners that spray out microparticles of dry ice to.
Oh, really? I don't know about that. But
anyway. Apparently they work really well to just knock off all the grease. It's like the only way to really clean a front surface mirror. You know, even in an alcohol wipe, you're going to destroy a front surface mirror.
Yeah, generally, just a little bit of soap and water usually works pretty good. The soap's there to cut the grease, but just never clean optics dry. That's like the absolute no-no. You will scratch stuff.
Well,
yeah.
I love that we can go on for 10 minutes just talking about
how to clean glasses. Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a trickier subject than you think. I know, like I use photography equipment, and the answer there is generally only clean your lenses when you've smudged them. I mean, basically on a camera lens, because it's out of focus, people do more damage by cleaning their equipment than they do by leaving it alone. Unless you've got dirt on it, unless you physically got something on it, in which case you should blow it off if you can. And as a last resort, liquid clean stuff, because liquid cleaning even will take off chemical. A lot of these things have AR coatings and stuff on it, and even with good liquid cleaners, you'll start to attack the coatings.
Awesome.
Just re-sputter the surface. Someone said, "Hey, I actually have the equipment to do that."
I could listen to you both all night. We are a bit over time, so
yeah, let's get going.
Just wanted to call the event. Thank you both so much for joining. Thank you, Karl.
It's so fun. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.